Hello everyone. I was chatting with a friend the other day and we were shocked to learn that the comedy show The Office is now over 24 years old. Many would say it's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, British comedies of all time. And there are many reasons for that, of course. There's the day-to-day life in the office, which really does reflect British office life. On top of that, there's a lot of slapstick humour thrown in, as well as the moving and quite sweet love story between Tim and Dawn at the centre of the show. However, I think the real reason why the show has held on in the British cultural collective consciousness for so long is because it riffs on a key issue of our time, that of the cultural change, especially towards political correctness. Now, the obvious and standard reading of the show is that it centres around someone who's a bit of a midwit, who thinks he's incredibly talented and complicated and skilled in various creative fields, but in reality struggles to truly understand the modern world and modern political correctness, and therefore gets himself in many cringy situations where he says and does the wrong thing. That said, of course, you could read the show from more of a rightist perspective, i.e. it's sending up political correctness and how absurd it is, and I've even seen leftists state things like it's a sign of how the average British man can't abide with political correctness and how the whole leftist project has been a failure. Now, I wouldn't buy that reading myself. The point I'm making is that this show stays in the collective consciousness because it centres around a very hot-button issue of our epoch, that of the vast cultural change that came in with Blairism. And this is why it's shocking it was released 24 years ago, because it still feels very fresh. When you think about it, 2025 to 2001 is 24 years, but if we go the other way, 2001 goes back to 1977. Now, it goes without saying, folks in 1977 wouldn't have really got The Office because they hadn't had the great cultural shift in order for them to reference it correctly. But that 24 years on from the release of The Office, we still can get it and it doesn't seem aged, tells us something very important. While the modern world moves extremely quickly, we have smartphones and breaking news and busy lives and permacrisis, in reality, the cultural anchor hasn't really shifted all that much. Now really, this is just an echo of our political landscape. Since Tony Blair, every single Prime Minister has been in some way a Blairite. Now, I think that's about to change, as we'll get to, but it does tell us something very important. It's like we're trapped in time at the moment. I once heard it referenced that Tony Blair was the completion of the 60s liberal dream. Of course, the 60s was another great cultural break from tradition, but then with that, if you like, it was still somewhat underground. The day-to-day life was still a bit more rooted in national British conservative ideals. It wasn't until Blairism it came into full fruition and really took over the country. And this brings us to the core point of the video. When Blair came into power, it was when the liberal boomer finally dominated in Britain. Before that, you had the rule of the silent generation who were more religious, they were more stiff upper lip. Yet the consciousness of the liberal boomer was fostered in their teens in the 1960s with the rebelliousness of a John Lennon and the sweet hippie utopianism of a Peter, Paul and Mary. And throughout the 70s and 80s, the liberal boomer did grow up, got into the world of work in various industries, but never really lost the revolutionary liberal zeal, which again came into full fruition in the 90s with Tony Blair. Now, I'm saying all of this to frame our understanding of modern politics and how even the supposed, quote, right-wing Tories are still essentially liberals at heart, or at least see the world through that liberal frame. Here's about 800 years old Michael Heseltine, who's been in politics since 1959, speaking about how he thinks reform are fascists.
You described Reform and other parties across Europe today as among the right-wing equivalents of the fascists in the 1930s. Why?
Well, because that's what they are. The fascists were anti-Jews, and the protest today is anti-immigrant. But the same arguments, the same sort of human nature is being stirred up. Enoch Powell did the same in the 70s. And in the 60s, and it was a wholly destructive contribution to a civilized society.
Now, this is something I speak about on the channel all the time. If you criticise immigration, you will be seen as a Nazi, because that's all the liberal frame can truly understand. Its whole conception of the world is rooted in the post-Second World War ideology. However, it's especially ironic when it comes to someone like Enoch Powell, given he actually fought the Nazis himself. And on top of that, if you give him a fair hearing, he was actually right in what he was saying.
Anyway, Powell says, this point I think you ended with when you did that introductory reading, it's a transformation unprecedented in 1,000 years of English history. He goes on to say by 2000, there could be 7 million children of immigrants in this country, 1/10 of the whole population. Now, at the time, every critic of the speech said, this is disgraceful scaremongering to inflate the numbers in this way. I have to say, he was dead right. When you look at the 2001 census, 7 million people, non-white in Britain, 11% of the entire population.
I mean, in his speech, he says that is the official figure given to Parliament by the spokesman of the Registrar General's office. So he is actually quoting official figures with that.
But people were like, oh, no, that can't be right. That's not right at all.
Sound familiar? It's the same as today when we say if we continue along the same track, in a matter of decades, the British people, as many Europeans do, will be made minorities in their own homelands, and due to the rhetoric of the liberal system, disliked at best and hated minorities at worst. This, to my mind, is far from hyperbole. In fact, it's the most likely outcome if we continue on the present trajectory we're on. But to the liberal regime, it does seem like hyperbole because they're still locked in the ideology, the utopian ideology of the liberal boomer, completely detached from true reality and one's roots. It's also why we see commentators like Robert Peston doing his best impression of Gary Neville, speaking about the Manchester synagogue attack, and speaks about everything but Islam.
The causes are deep in the subconscious of millions of people. They can only be unlocked and expunged by curriculum changes in schools and universities, much greater vigilance of social media companies against hate speech, and, dare I say it, politicians with the courage to reject the easy and cancerous politics of identity and nationalism. The rise of anti-Semitism is not unconnected to the remorseless breakdown of the precept to love our neighbours.
So Peston's solution to a radical Islamist attacking some Jews in Manchester is to brainwash your children even more via the multicultural state propaganda apparatus while censoring you online so you're not allowed an opinion. Oh, also, you're supposed to throw your identity in the bin too. And as the cherry on the cake, he wants to reaffirm this weak, woke, counterfeit liberal Christianity to stab you in the heart via your own tradition. Do you see what I mean when I say these liberals try and be tolerant and kind, quote unquote, but are actually quite cruel when it comes down to it? The problem is for the liberal regime that the nativist position is quickly becoming that the British people would like a homeland, so they know in 250 years their children will still be in what looks something like Britain. And yeah, that will involve some difficult moves, such as leaving the European Court of Human Rights. Now, the big argument against leaving the ECHR is that we'll lose all the rights therein, freedom of speech, not that we have much of that anyway, human rights and so on. But nobody's explained why we can't have those rights enshrined in our own nation, in our own way. What do we need an international liberal body for? Yet, surprise, surprise, here's ex-Tory MP Tobias Ellwood writing in The Telegraph that leaving the ECHR is an anti-conservative position. Essentially now, to him, being a conservative is just conserving the liberal system, and it's pretty much been that way since Blair, arguably since Major. But things are so bad with the modern Tory party, even the progressive liberals can understand what's gone wrong. Here's this Ollie fella from the detestable Politics Joe.
If the electorate keeps asking for Coke, you give them Diet Coke. Eventually, they're going to smash open the cabinet and nick all the Coke in the shop, right? Time and time again, the electorate have voted for political parties that have promised to reduce legal and illegal migration, and time again, political parties have failed to deliver on it. I genuinely think the Tories should just be looking at themselves in the mirror. Really. Where has this sort of threat on our right-wing flank come from in the shape of reform? They can look to themselves. And a word of warning for Keir Starmer and his Labour government. You can feed that dragon, the bigoted one, as much as you like, but in the end, you will never appease it and it will eat you in the end.
Now, he was making such a good point until he had to go back to the typical you're bigoted and evil type thing. But it's ironic, as he doesn't seem to recognise that it also works the same the other way around. You can feed the liberal dragon as much as you like, but you'll never be enough for it. You'll never be woke enough. You'll never be right on enough. You'll never be perfect enough. Now, our liberal friends can labour on in the age of the liberal boomer, pretending that it will just last forever and eventually turn into this utopian, wondrous country. However, the rest of us are seeing that their line is increasingly absurd because we can see that Britain is now falling into a state of disrepair. It's decaying everywhere. We have semi-autonomous enclaves of differing groups which are completely dominated by ethno-religious tribes. We have mass state propaganda telling us how everything is built by immigrants and diversity, while those very immigrants demand money from us and endless repentance for how evil we are as the country gets more and more alien. The silver lining to all of this is, however, that the age of the liberal boomer is finally coming to an end. We can see that in Keir Starmer's government. In a sense, what's wrong with Keir Starmer's government isn't exactly the Labour Party itself, it's that the liberal ideology is in complete tatters. It's falling apart at the seams now. And this is the real subtext behind the liberal lectures we've been getting from Gary Neville and Robert Peston and Ollie Dugmore and the rest of them. It's not really about convincing you that the liberal system is the way. It's about convincing themselves that the liberal system still stands and is still just. Their utopian ideology is still real. But what Ollie Dugmore refers to as, quote, the bigoted dragon is really conceptualised in deep England, in Gammonsilla, and the awakening sense of identity and homeland and tradition. This is going to split the country, and it's unavoidable now. For decades, throughout the age of the liberal boomer, the dominant story has been one of, quote, reason and progress and measurable outcomes. Liberal rational humanism promised that with enough knowledge and management, everything, society, culture, even happiness itself, could apparently be engineered by our higher-ups. But life doesn't fit neatly into charts or checklists. Beneath that surface, older forces are stirring: loyalty, myth, people's place, tradition, a sense of the sacred that refuses to be quantified. To my mind, the real divide now isn't politics, it's between those who think the world can be explained and those who feel it on a deeper level. What I'm talking to is, of course, deeper than politics, but I do think it will be a central theme throughout the rest of the century, and it will dictate the outcome for countries like Britain and the rest of Europe with regards to whether we thrive or whether we simply decay and die. As always, these are my thoughts. Do let me know what you think down below. You can subscribe to the sister channel, The Sacred Way, about personal and spiritual transformation, in the description. Also got the Substack there if you'd like to get exclusive content and support me. Other than that, do subscribe to this channel if you're new, and enjoy the rest of your day.